Okay, today's lecture is going to be over Chapter 11, Section 1, Objectives. Describe the use of the rainforest. Number 2, explain the social costs of destruction of the rainforest. And number 3, discuss how destruction of the rainforest can be prevented. So the first thing that we're going to look at here is we're actually going to kind of look at the map of the United States. Now, what we're going to look at when we start looking at countries and we start looking at satellite images is that we want to go ahead and we want to look and we want to see different colors. We kind of say that we want to go back and we want to look at third grade. And in third grade, you could just see simple colors. So what we're going to do is we're going to look and we're going to see at the United States. And in the United States, there's a line that's almost drawn straight down the middle. To the east there or to the right, what we see is that there's a lot of green here. Now, what a lot of people think that signifies is that signifies grassland, which if you look inside where Nebraska would be, is that you would see some green right there, but we don't have a ton of grassland. What we see a lot more is that we have things like corn and we have things like soybeans. So what we can say about the green is not so much that it's grass, is that it's actually vegetation. So when we see green, we want to think about vegetation. Now, what we also can look at is that there's some dark green in these areas and some dark green in these areas. And what that's going to signify is forest. So dark green, forest. If it's just green, it's going to be vegetation. Now, what we can also look at is if we start looking in kind of the western area right here, we can see the elevation, and that's going to go ahead and that's going to be mountain ranges. And then what we can also look at is that kind of darker gray area, darker tan area is going to be a little bit more of the desert area. Of course, the blue is going to go ahead and be water. Now, what's so important about that is that the blue does mean water, but that water usually has something to do with fishing. So when we start looking on the east coast of the United States, fishing is going to be very important. It's actually interesting when you start looking back in the United States history, when we get the Treaty of Paris that basically lets the United States become its own country. Part of that Treaty of Paris actually has the land up here, allows the United States to actually have fishing in the border basically between Canada and the United States. So again, what we see is that we can look at just a satellite image of the United States and we can say, okay, green is going to go ahead and signify vegetation, dark green is going to go ahead and signify forest. We look at tan and it's going to probably be desert, and tan with a little bit of white is going to go ahead and it's going to be mountain range. So if we go ahead and we kind of start to go down to where we see Brazil in this area right here, the biggest thing that comes in this area is going to be this dark green. Okay, now a lot of people look at the dark green and they say, okay, that has to be forest, and what that means is that a lot of people are going to live there. Think about in the Northwest, when we start talking about Oregon, we start looking at California, we start looking at Washington. But in these areas with this is going to be it's going to be a little bit more of your rainforest, and so what we see is that a lot of people don't live here. So it's actually the exact opposite. In the United States, when we look at places like Colorado, Arizona, we see the desert area, people don't live there. Same thing in Southwest Asia. But here in Brazil, it actually shows that it's the exact opposite, is that in this very heavy, densely forested area, you're not going to have as many people at all. So again, that kind of helps us here. Obviously, then we do have water that's going to run through there, and it's going to kind of make it so that people can live in certain areas. Again, not all of them, but they can go ahead and they can live in certain areas. So if we go ahead and we look at the rainforest here and we kind of look at the lecture, the rainforest is a biodiversity, and that means that they have a wide range of plants and animals, and again, they kind of have that interaction. 50 million acres of the rainforest is worldwide, and it's going to be destroyed annually. Mahogany, cedar harvested, all there's going to be exported from the Amazon. Poor native farmers are going to clear the rainforest for crops. So what we see is that these people are very, very poor in Brazil. And so what happens is that they want to come out and they basically want to have a decent wage. They want to be able to grow things that are good. And so what they're doing is starting to cut down the rainforest. Now, why don't they go somewhere else? This is where it says poor soil fertility, increased erosion is going to lead to more timber clearing. So basically, they can't go anywhere else. They essentially have to stay in the area that is the rainforest. But again, they're cutting them down, which is going to cause more issues. Over half 500,000 Amazon forest, rainforest is in Brazil, growing population in that area. So what we see is that back in 2000 there's 173 million. It's projected in 2020 that you have 20 million people. And when you have all those people, you have to figure out ways for them to have jobs, live, be able to eat, and things like that. Now, what we see, and this is the problem of this destruction, is deforestation. Deforestation is cutting down and clearing away of trees. Now, I don't want you to think that deforestation is always a bad thing, but when we start talking about the rainforest and we start talking about the idea that the area is going to go ahead and produce oxygen for the world, we don't want to cut down a lot of it, but the people of Brazil want to, because they want to be able to live. Now, of course, there's going to be some environmental concerns that we do see. Rainforest is going to regulate climate. It absorbs carbon dioxide and produces oxygen. I believe you were probably taught back in middle school about plants, and those plants absorb carbon dioxide, and they're going to go ahead and they're going to send off oxygen for the people to breathe. Well, the problem is that if we're cutting down the rainforest, there are less trees and there's more carbon dioxide in the area. And with more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, there's more carbon dioxide in the world. What we see is global warming. It's an atmospheric temperature rise and weather pattern change. And so what we see is that in the United States, all across the entire world, you're going to go ahead and you're going to see these major weather patterns that we just haven't seen very much of. Now, plants and animals are also in danger. Covers, again, this deforestation, this destruction. You're going to go ahead and you're going to see that it's going to go ahead and it's going to cover 6% of the Earth's surface, but has 50% of the plants and animal species. So what that means is that the forest is not really that big, and it doesn't cover a bunch of the Earth, but it's going to have almost half of the plant and animal species living in it. Researchers are trying to develop medicine for the rainforest and plants, but again, if they're cutting them down, it's difficult. Now, it's easy for us to sit here and to say that we need to stop the deforestation and the destruction of the rainforest, but it's a juggling act, because you're trying to balance the economic activity and the development with rainforest preservation. So you want to help the people basically live, but you also want to be able to have a rainforest that's going to be able to help not have less oxygen and more carbon dioxide. Some countries are trying to restrict economic development. What they're doing is that they're doing grassroots campaign to basically educate people about the rainforest. They're trying to protest environmental damages, and they're essentially trying to stop the cutting down of the rainforest. Now, probably one of the best ways that they can do this is sometimes environmental agencies are going to come in and do what's called a debt for nature swap. Please make sure that you know this. You're going to see this at a later date. But a debt for nature swap is pretty simple. Groups come to an organization or to a government, and they're going to basically give them money. And what they say is, we want you to not cut down the rainforest. So, for example, if a group comes to Brazil and they say, hey, here's $5 million, don't cut down the rainforest, then the government can take that $5 million and they can pay those people that may have been trying to cut down the rainforest. They could pay them to improve the infrastructure, create more roads, canals, airports, sewers, things like that. Of course, the most difficult thing about this is that how do you get that $5 million? How do you get enough money so that the government can basically benefit from it? And that, again, is that debt for nature swap that basically they're trying to help stop clearing the rainforest. This has been the lecture over Chapter 11, Section 1. Make sure that you complete the assessments at the end of this section.